School's Open Talk program. Today we have Hemmant Jha with us from Honest Structures, and we're very excited to have him here and give us an insight into design and the world of creativity. And just to let everyone know a little bit about the Goa School, we are located in Goa and are a program that helps young adults that are looking to make changes and to create a better society in the location that they are at. And we hold programs every couple of months, and you can learn more about us on thegoaschool.com. So let's get a little bit of background from Madhuri. So Madhuri is our director, and she currently is traveling and unable to make it. So she sent a message saying, I'm so sorry, I'm unable to attend today. I'm currently at the Goa airport, gazing at all the coral and underwater life painted on the walls. We seem to be missing the connection to climate change. It seems like it's a good design, but without a social message. So Hema, she actually has a question for you. But I told her that we would probably put it in a little bit later on. So I'll put that into you a little bit later on. Anybody else that does have questions through the talk, kindly type it into the chat box, and we will take it on as we go through the session. This is a 40-minute Zoom session, so if it does cut out, please do log back in onto the same link. So Hemmant, once again, welcome, and welcome to everyone that is here today. So let's start with why is it important to talk about design?
Paloma, if you think about it, design is all around us, right? We can't escape it. So if you look at wherever we are in the moment right now, you know, the shirt was designed by somebody, these headphones, the screen that you're looking at, the app that you use to order food, the homes that you live in, the chairs that you're sitting on. So design is everywhere. It's obviously been done by somebody because it didn't just happen on its own. And the impact of design, therefore, is massive, right? Which is why it's so incredibly important. Very often we think of design as being this extra layer of something. You know, it's just about how something looks. Maybe it looks a little bit special or not so special. But if you think about design in a much broader way, let's say if you think about design as being creative problem solving, then you can apply that kind of thinking or that kind of logic to pretty much everything in our lives. And that's why it's such a big deal. I think you might be on mute.
Sorry. So I was saying,
fine,
we don't really think about the everyday things that are around us and how much thought has gone into the design of it. So that is like a really interesting point that you've brought up. So in that way, is there such a thing as bad design? And what would you say that is?
It's so I think, you know, because design is it's ubiquitous, right? There are so many people who design or who can design. We could just say that design is actually very subjective. And if something is really subjective, then maybe there's no such thing as bad design, because what's bad to one person may be perfectly fine for somebody else. So I think in order to make sense of this, maybe we should think about this as responsible versus irresponsible design, right? So to Madhuri's point earlier, she saw those painted sort of pictures on the wall, right? But they had no real context. That is unfortunate because it obviously hasn't been thought through very well. Imagine if you were to design a chair, right? So I would say that in our time, because we are much more aware of the impact that we have on the environment, we might say that a good chair is one that not only works as a chair, but that is made using sustainable materials and manufacturing practices, that reduces waste, that is highly efficient in its use, that is maybe designed to last for a lifetime. That's how we think about products when we design them, and I like to think of that as being a responsible way to think about design. Another example of design that I actually had personally just a few weeks ago was when I went to book an air ticket. So I went online to the airline's website, and I got an error message. And on the screen went gray, and there was a big red box, and the red box said error in
I'm
big
sorry.
letters.
Sorry, I'm just going to cut you off a little bit. There's a lot of the wind that is cutting in. Is it possible? Yeah.
What, maybe I'll just move myself to a slightly different
Yeah, I'm so sorry.
1 second. No.
You were on mute, Paloma. I think you said something.
Oh, sorry. I was just saying I apologize. We'll just take a quick pause. I don't know. Was it disturbing the wind for you as well?
Yes, it was.
Okay. Yeah. Just. So actually, Nikhil's very kindly having this talk now. He's actually all the way in the US, so it's quite a bit of a time difference for him. But the early morning.
Oh no, not at all. Not for me.
Oh, okay.
Okay, good.
Right.
How about
Thank
now?
you.
Is this better?
Yes, much better. Thank you so much.
Okay. So as I was saying, I went to a website to book an air ticket, and I got a gray screen, and I got an error message saying error, something went wrong, please try again. Now, I'm looking at this thing wondering, you say something went wrong. What went wrong? Was it me? Was it you? Was it the website? Was it the bandwidth? Was it the browser? I mean, something went wrong. Makes no sense. And then it says, please try again. Now, if you don't know what went wrong, what are you going to try again? And so I tried loading the page, and I got the same error message, the same box. And I think that is an example of bad design. So I don't like to say something is bad, but I think that's, it's really poorly considered.
Yeah.
So I think poorly considered design is bad design, which doesn't really take into account that, you have real people on the other side of whatever it is you're trying to do. And so let's just think it through.
Absolutely. That's so right. I guess everyone does have like their different opinions. You can't really say something is bad, but if it isn't functional or it isn't helpful.
Exactly.
Right? Yeah,
exactly.
Absolutely. So design thinking is human-centered. We kind of think about it for humans. Do you see an overlap with a human rights approach towards design?
Absolutely. I think it's, so I'm going to use another example for this one. So as a company, we make furniture, right? And when we started out, even thinking about who would make our furniture, we went to a lot of factories. We finally started working with a manufacturer in Goa. And these guys are, what I really liked about their factory, their operation, was that they treated their people really well. Now, what does that mean in the context of a factory? It means that you have a clean workspace, you have lots of light, you have good ventilation systems, you have good safety protocols in place. Everybody has safety equipment, right? Which is simple. It's gloves, it's glasses, it's eye protection. Everybody got breaks at certain periods of time. Everybody had uniforms, and things were run properly and professionally, right? Now, as part of the same, at around the same time, I was also invited by other factories to come and see their work. Everybody wanted to make our stuff. And so I went to another factory, different part of the country. And, you drive up, and typically there's a reception kind of block. So you walk in and it's air conditioned, and, there's a bunch of products that they've made, and the two owners come out, and, we're sitting upstairs and drinking espresso and Coca-Cola and looking at their products. And they're telling me about how, sorry, they export their products to different parts of the world. to the US, to UK, to Italy. And so I said, okay, I'd love to see your factory. And so they took me to their factory. And, we walked down the steps and we walk into the shed next door, which is a tin shed. It has no floor, so it's a mud floor. There are a bunch of people sitting on the floor in different corners of the shed and not properly clothed even, no protection. And they're using grinders and cutters to make stuff by hand. There are sparks flying absolutely everywhere. In another part of the same factory, they're coating products, but they're basically dipping products. They're holding them with their bare hands and they're dipping them into different vats of chemicals. The hands are immersed in chemicals, which are kind of corrosive. They're designed to clean metals. So they're obviously not good for your hands. And I was thinking that this was absolutely absurd. On the one hand, we're talking about products that are going to different parts of the world and how fancy everything is. And on the other hand, here you have people who are probably going to hurt themselves or, God forbid, die because of the working conditions there. And so the one thing that I would encourage everyone to do is think about, when you think about products that are really cheap, think about the true cost. There's a reason that they're cheap, right? And so in the world of manufacturing or the world of products, definitely, there is absolutely a connection between how people are treated and how products are made. And so therefore, I think it's very much a human rights centric endeavor anytime we design.
Yes, that's a very important point. I guess, is there a way to find out though, like, how it's kind of difficult, but is there a way to find out how that is, how things are happening and like which products are better, or maybe just go for the products that mention that they do take care of their employees? Probably that would be the way to go forward.
I think so. I mean,
yeah.
I think every company at this point has, they put out something about corporate social responsibility.
Absolutely.
Or something similar. And there's, maybe take that with a grain of salt as well. But I think it's a good start.
Yeah, absolutely. So it is important to think about that as well. And why is it that design thinking suddenly has become such a popular concept? Is it really something that is new, or is it a rehash of like previously known ideas? So design thinking.
So I think, sorry, if you think of design thinking as being creative problem solving, I think as people, even animals do it, right? You can see crows doing marvelous things with pebbles and whatnot. But I think one of the reasons that design thinking is so much in the conversation today is because when we think of everything that surrounds us, examples of technology or examples of, products or whatever, I think in many ways we've actually reached a limit to what these things can do. So our phones are already fast enough. Our buildings are already strong enough. There are plenty of different apps that can do things for us in many different ways. So there's no shortage of apps. And so we've gone from an age or an era when things were slower, or maybe there was not enough of something. So it was an age of scarcity, to now where there's an age of plenty. So technology is already super fast. We have trouble keeping up with technology, right? And so when you get to an age when there's plenty of everything, how do you differentiate yourself? And the best way to do that is by providing a better experience to people, right? And so the website, for example, that I mentioned, functionally, it's probably fine in other ways, but the experience was terrible. Other websites have a much better experience. So I think that's where design thinking really comes into play, because you can apply creative thinking now to pretty much everything, right? So whether it is a legal document that is easier to read than another legal document, whether it is a website that's easier to navigate, whether it is an app that's easier to place an order on, I think that's where the differentiation happens. And that's why design thinking has very quickly gone to being a central focus for so many companies and people.
So like in essence, it would basically be, see it like initially when you started having something, it was just as a requirement. So for example, if you got a bed, it was because you needed to sleep on something softer, but then now you can take that same bed and redesign it in a way that is more functional. Is that like how I'm understanding it?
Right, but then you can also get the bed to recognize your sleep patterns. You can get the bed to adjust to the firmness or softness depending on how you like it, right? You can have beds that now have ventilation, so if it feels that you're perspiring heavily at night, maybe it circulates air through the mattress. And these were things that were, unimaginable a few years ago, and people would wonder, why would you need to do that? But because everybody has a mattress now, I mean, how do you decide which mattress to pick? So there you go. So, toss a bunch of design at it, design thinking.
Absolutely. So for those that are young students who would be probably seeing this recording at a later point, and maybe a few that are already on here, how would you say that you can either train or study to become a design thinker?
So I think there are two ways to do this. One is that you could simply go to school. Right? So I used to teach at the Institute of Design at IIT here in Chicago. And it's a design program that basically is for people who are not designers to begin with. And so my students were all from different backgrounds. Could be sales and marketing, could be architecture, could be different types of engineering. And all of them came to school to learn how to apply design thinking to their areas of expertise, and then they go out into the world and apply it to whatever problem they're trying to solve. That's one way of doing it. And I think the other way is to simply embrace the design process, right? I mean, all of us, in some ways, whether you're making a birthday card for somebody, whether you're designing an outfit for yourself, whether you're cooking a meal, in some ways, you're applying some design principles to everything. And so I would say, keep an open mind, try new things, and sort of explore possibilities in what you do every day. Very often we think that there are only certain ways to do certain things, and I would absolutely say that is not the case. So I'd say whatever you do, try to do things a bit differently, and maybe try to do things in the way that you think they should be done versus currently how they are being done. And so if you remove that sort of barrier from our mind, saying that there's a right and a wrong way of doing things, or there's a certain way that professionals would do it or not do it, I think then we actually get to experience design thinking for ourselves. It doesn't sound like a massive deal, but once it sort of clicks, it's actually pretty fantastic. Another approach that I've used, and when I had my the design innovation group, and I was setting that up at Godrej, one of the things I'd done was made sure that my entire team had shared sort of common experiences that were good design experiences. For example, all of us, I insisted, would use Apple computers. Now, if you look at the design of an Apple computer, it's well designed, it's well made. And if it's a tool that you use every day for doing absolutely everything, then that's going to rub off on you. Right? The experience of a good machine will rub off on you, or the experience of good interface will rub off on you. And what's really nice about experiencing something better is that it's very difficult to go back to something that's not as good. And so if you simply surround yourself with tools and experiences that you instinctively feel are better, that's an excellent and really easy first step into the world of experiencing design and design thinking.
Oh, that's really interesting. Yeah, that is quite a bit to ponder on as to how it is kind of like your interests that kind of shape you, and then also having new interests can shape you in a different way.
Absolutely.
So that's, very, very nice. So if you do get into a company and you have a team, how do you get them to think along the lines of design thinking? And why is it different to working as a solo designer? So if you were, on your own designing, and then if you happen to have a team that you work with.
That's an interesting question. So I would refer back to the example at Godrej, right? So everybody used Apple computers. Now, the nice thing about that was that regardless of what anybody on the team did, whether they were HR or the legal department or designers or engineers, everybody had a shared common good experience. Imagine if you were to extend that to providing, let's say, really well-made uniforms to everybody, right? Or always ordering your flight tickets through a common app that you knew would actually work really well. So I think a gentle and consistent exposure to examples of good design in the everyday world, rather than kind of an enforced layer of design on top of everything, I think would be the way to go. All organizations are different. They all have different requirements. It could be something as simple as, if you're a legal office, picking the right kind of font, which would make your documents that much more readable for everybody. That makes a huge difference, right? You may not realize it in the moment, but certain fonts are just easier on the eyes than other fonts. Maybe just the size of the font. So I think, coming back to how ubiquitous design is, we don't need to think of design as this additional sort of layer that's superimposed on top of everything else. It's basically making informed and good decisions in the everyday that I feel would be the most effective.
And actually, the more that you talk about it, the more I realize that you can actually look at everything around the room with a different set of eyes now. Especially after talking to you, like it's so amazing. I'm like actually looking around my room and saying, okay, I need to think about some of these things. So would you design or would design thinking help in the tiny house concept? I know it's probably something bigger that is abroad and not maybe just starting in India. I've heard of a few here in India. But would design thinking help in the tiny house concept? And is this a concept that would come into India, like in a bigger way?
So I love the tiny house concept. In fact, I've thought about tiny houses for myself for a long time, because I think what's really cool about a tiny house is that so many decisions are already made for you. The house is tiny, right? So you've got a small footprint. It's probably not going to cost a lot of money, which is good. So you have some limits to how much you can possibly spend on it. And then I think of how many possibilities it opens up. If it's a small footprint, I mean, Goa is a lovely place, right? And so every time I drive around Goa, kind of look around, you see the ocean, you see the hills, you see fields of rice, and you see coconut palms. And imagine if you actually had a tiny house, and in a place like Goa, if most of your living was actually done outside the house rather than inside the house. So then maybe you say that the idea of a 1 BHK or a 3 BHK no longer really applies, because what do you really need? You need access to the outdoors. You need a little private space of your own to maybe sleep and work in, maybe cook in. But if you kind of open up your life in a way that is conducive to where you live, I think the idea of a tiny house could be absolutely fantastic. A tiny footprint, incredible connection to the outside world, small budget, small environmental impact. I mean, it's great. In fact, a good friend of mine, Dean De Cruz, who's an architect in Goa, I know he loves the idea of a tiny house. And so if anybody's interested in immediately kind of jumping onto this, I would recommend getting in touch with him. I think he could talk about this for a long time.
Okay, good to know.
Yeah.
So yeah, because you realize, when you've had like larger houses, how much you actually don't spend that much time in all the rooms. And so the tiny house kind of solves a lot of that, because you just have the bare minimum of what you need. And so many things become, sorry, so many things become important to you in that way. So let's say, what are some of the examples of excellent design solutions for designing cities, homes, schools that you can point us at? I know you've done some work in those areas. So what are some examples of excellent design solutions for these areas?
So I think if I were to think of cities, I guess I have my opinion about what makes a good city has actually evolved over time. If you'd asked me the same question maybe 20 years ago, I would have picked a really modern city, or what is considered a conventionally progressive city as an example of good design. So if you look at a place like New York, or if you look at Tokyo, they are in some ways ruthlessly efficient, right? So everything's on a grid. Everything works. The trains are always on time. There are 10 different ways to get anything done. Everything's moving at a very, very fast pace. And 10, 15, 20 years ago, I would have said that's a really good example. I think I've revised my opinion now, where I feel that while there is definitely something to be said for places like that and for modern cities in general, I think they don't really operate at a speed and at a scale that people do. And I think to a large extent, they are incredibly dehumanizing. So as an example of a good city or a well-designed city, I would almost pick an ancient city. If you look at the roads in ancient cities, I mean, if you drive around Goa, you'll find that the roads are almost never straight, right? I think that's a wonderful thing. Roads are never straight, which means that you can never drive super fast, even though people do. But still, you can actually experience the place that you're in a lot better. Things do move slower. You are able to walk places. I remember when I lived in Los Angeles, I went to downtown LA to just walk around, which was the most ridiculous decision that I've made in a long time, because many places, there were no walkways, there were no places for people to walk. And so I nearly got run over by the cars that were driving past, right? I mean, that's absurd. To have a city where you can't walk is crazy. So I'd say any example of an ancient city or an older city or a smaller city, which is built from the ground up around the idea that people will live in it, I think is much nicer than a modern sort of, like a New York. Homes, I would love the idea of a tiny home. I think smaller homes are fantastic. Traditional homes are actually great because I think they respond a lot better to the climate and the culture where they are. So the idea in Rajasthan, I grew up in Rajasthan, where you have homes that have very small windows, and the windows are always towards the top to allow for hot air to escape. Right? I mean, that's an important thing. Traditional homes in Goa, which have the sit-outs on the front, the clay tiles as roofs, I think those are very appropriate to the climate. I think that's fantastic. And as far as schools go, I think any school where you see happy kids, that's a well-designed school. So we've actually done quite a bit of work with Manavikas school in Goa, and it was actually lovely. Spent a lot of time there, met the teachers and the faculty, the director, the teacher, saw the students, and it was nice. So I'd say happy students, a sure sign of a well-designed school, a well-designed school experience.
Absolutely. Well, nice. So, so this was a question that we got earlier from Madhuri, and she wanted to ask, how can we design airports and public spaces to deliver social messages and encourage good public behavior? And she said, should we design airports and public spaces to promote good social behavior and encourage good public behavior? Or is it boring for people to be preached to? Although, yeah.
Sorry, please go ahead.
No, so she was just saying whether we should design it in a way that we still promote a public message, or whether people are already getting enough advertising that they're tired of hearing about it. And just to let you know, we have just about 3 minutes before we might get cut off. So just in case we do get cut off, please just re-click on the link for everybody. I don't know whether you want to take up
that's a really good question from Madhuri. So I think Absolutely. Airports and public spaces can absolutely be designed better. So what happens at the moment, and it's similar to my example about large cities, that you actually don't feel a personal connection to that large city, right? You're part of a machine, essentially. Airports are a lot like that. And if you've been to any of the newer airports, they're massive things. They're massive, they're highly impersonal. You don't really feel a connection to where you are. You're simply kind of charging through an infrastructure to get somewhere. And I think it's very difficult to ask people to behave responsibly in an environment to which they feel no connection, right? And they feel no ownership. So it basically becomes a space that's kind of like a no man's land, which also brings out the worst behaviors in people. And I think preaching to people at a time like that is absolutely the worst thing that you could do, because you're already under stress. Nobody really wants to hear preachy messages. We already have too much advertising thrown at us. So I think there are many subtle ways of humanizing spaces, maybe through the idea of scale, to making spaces feel more personal and more approachable. And therefore, we would feel a sense of responsibility towards whichever place we're in. And I think it's a number of small interventions that should be largely invisible, but effective, that can help make these just much nicer experiences for everybody. But it can absolutely be done. But you're right, talking about it or shouting it out, that's not the way.
Yeah, absolutely. Do we have any other questions from the audience?
Yeah, there was a little something that I thought it would be interesting to discuss. So one of the key aspects of design nowadays is sustainability, and increasingly now we're looking into that, and it's slowly maybe becoming a cornerstone of thinking when we design new products. Now there, one thing that sort of comes out, is that when we are designing products and as you know, we do work mainly in the electronic system design part of things. There, what we are seeing is that in a bid to outcompete your competitors, people are adding more and more and more features to whatever it is that they're designing. Well, the reality is that the users are using less and less and less features. So for example, if you look at your washing machine, it will say that, okay, it can wash your clothes in 44 different ways. To be honest, I've never used more than one way in the washing machine that I have had at home. But then the next guy comes around and he has 46 ways of doing it instead of 44, so that he can get the seal. So it almost looks irresponsible to go on doing this, because each new way you want to add to that is consuming a lot of resources during design, manufacturing. Somebody's got to pay for all of this, and which I'm sure hits sustainability in a very adverse way. So is there any effort that is happening or should happen, and you go back, say, hey buddy, let's go from 44 to 40 and 36 and not the other way around?
That's a lovely question. And Nikhil, I've experienced that sort of thing too. And I think when I hear going from 44 to 46, that seems to me like a very old-fashioned sales and marketing-driven approach, where you say, Acha, today so-and-so has done 44, tomorrow we will do 46, and then we will rule the world. I think the ineffective approach that I have seen is basically taking people who are from, let's say, sales and marketing, people who are responsible for the P&L of an organization, so the CEOs, the CFOs, the decision makers, who have nothing to do with design, ostensibly on the surface, and immersing them in some kind of a design program. I mean, this is the kind of thing that we used to do as consultants. This is the kind of thing that the Institute of Design also does, where they have an executive sort of program for a few weeks, right? And what it really does is open up people's minds to the possibilities that there is another way of thinking about things, that maybe all you need on that washing machine is one button. And if that's designed intelligently enough, you basically say, you know what, I'm just going to push this one button and my clothes are going to be perfect every time, right? And obviously people like you will do a lot of work in the background to make sure that works properly. But I think we can bring that change about by simply showing people that there is another way of thinking and then making it safe for them to make the decisions. So if you look at a traditional structure of decision making, it's very easy to blame somebody for something, right? So they also need backup, they also need handholding and support. And so if you can provide them with those tools, I think over a period of time, you'll actually start to see that change happen. And then obviously somebody has to take the first step. So it'll always be the early mover, but then the others will actually follow. But that's a lovely question.
Yeah. And maybe this change then needs to start at the top.
It's, I used to think that as well. And I almost feel that that's important. But the culture of an organization is typically what causes these things to happen. So it's not one person who's saying that we need 46. It's pretty much a belief system in the entire group. And so when we think of design change, we very often talk of culture change. And so, yes, the people at the top matter, but the people who are making everyday decisions, who are not the people at the top, they also matter equally, maybe even more. So I think a gentle and consistent, not just a preachy kind of education, but an experiential education about design or the right way to make decisions in our time would be a good thing to do.
Yeah. Okay, thanks.
I think actually Nikhil brought up some quite an interesting question, because when you think about the things that we do and how much time we have, and how you had mentioned that technology is so far forward, there are just so many things that are there, and for, I guess, each individual, you kind of have to see what is it that best suits you as a consumer, and then look at it from like a design point of view, as to think about what would be the best suited design element. What would be the best suited design element? Sorry, Jyotsna, did you say something?
So, I mean, I think you're totally right. In fact, one of the reasons that, there are probably very few machines that don't have 44 watch cycles or cycles is because people are anxious about change, right? And so what design does, or what design thinking I think does best, is actually remove that anxiety, right? It opens up the possibilities, it removes the anxiety, which then allows you to make decisions that are just better for everyone, right? So in Nikhil's case, they're better for the environment in a certain way. To Madhuri's question earlier, applying sensitive sort of design principles to design of airports will actually make those better spaces. And you can absolutely see that if we were to apply design thinking to so many of the everyday things that we do, and if we see them manifest themselves in the website that I was using to book the ticket, in Nikhil's washing machines, in Madhuri's airports, collectively and systemically, things could be significantly better for so many of us over time. So I think that's one of the reasons why design thinking is extremely important and extremely popular these days, because we can actually see the far-reaching implications of those actions, of those moves.
Thank you. So I think Jyotsna has a question in relation to about the washing machines and other products that packed up after a few years. And what's the solution, or the eco-friendly solution for these items? So I guess items that are no longer in use possibly, and maybe what can be done with them, like in a more sustainable way. I'm sorry.
Guys, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yes,
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah.
It's a good question about the washing machine. In fact, what's happened over the last 20 or 30 years is actually very different from the way we used to design and make things before that. Right? You would buy a car, and the car would basically stay with you for decades and decades, right? You would buy an appliance like a radio that would stay with you. I mean, grandfather had a radio that still works perfectly well. And then when you have devices and appliances and products that last for a really long time, it's very difficult for companies to make money, because if they just sell you one product and you never buy anything again, well, how will they stay in business? And so there was this, and there is a concerted effort from a lot of companies to make products that are going to be obsolete. So it's planned obsolescence. They will become obsolete in a relatively short period of time. There's a massive movement in the US at the moment about the right to repair, because there are lots of companies that have locked people out of being able to repair their own products. You simply can't do it. And it's a massive problem when you have devices like tractors for farmers, right? If you can't repair your equipment and you have to rely on the original company for service every time, well, that's not really going to work. So I think the solution is for us to realize that for companies to realize that, yes, while there is money to be made by selling more and more crappy products, maybe there's also money to be made by charging people the real cost or the real price of doing things really well, and then being able to provide them with service and solutions for the end of life of products. So if you look at our furniture, they're all designed for the end of life. They're designed to either be refurbished or cleanly recycled. They're guaranteed for life. And the idea is that when you buy something, you shouldn't just have to throw it out. So your question about washing machines is absolutely spot on. They will die after a few years, because they're not designed to be either repaired or recycled. They will simply go into landfills. And that's completely ridiculous. It's completely unsustainable. And I think when enough companies sort of get slapped on the wrist by consumers like you, because they won't buy their machines, that's when this will stop. That's really the only way.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much, Hemmant. Are there any other questions from the audience?
Well, technically, this could go on for hours, but we're mindful of the fact that because I've had long conversations with Hemmant, and I know for a fact this can go on for hours. So I think nothing more, at least from me today.
Okay, thank you so much.
And Paloma, if anybody has any questions, you can always reach out,
message out to you,
email, or
I shall do.
Happy to.
Thank you very much. Thank you everyone for joining in the open talk session with the Goa School. It was wonderful having Hemmant Jha here from Honest Structures, talking to us about designing products in a clean, modern, and responsible way. And all of us who were here, we've learned so much, and even I've learned to look at things from such a new point of view. So thank you very much for giving us your time and answering all of our questions. Yeah, it was a pleasure
Very
having
happy
you.
to be here. Happy to do it.
Thank you so much. Yeah, thanks everyone.
Evening,
have a wonderful evening. Yes, and have a great day to you, Hemmant. Okay,
Bye.
thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you all. Bye.